May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Prayer. Today's topic is prayer. And for those of you who may be visitors, we are preaching this summer on topics and questions that we have gathered from you all, the congregation. And there's still plenty of topics left to be picked. So I don't know if we have any of those goldenrod inserts that we used to have, but if you want to take any little piece of paper and jot down topics or questions, we would certainly love to hear from you about what you would like us to be discussing in our sermon times this summer. Prayer. It's a funny thing, prayer. On the one hand, I think all of us would say quite easily that prayer is at the center of who we are as Christians. Many of us here do it daily. And yet, there's something incredibly mysterious about prayer. Right? Something that all of us at different times in our spiritual lives struggle to understand. Now, in picking the verses from the Bible that I wanted to have you hear this morning, I had no less than 253 options to choose from. So I think we can safely say that prayer is pretty important. So that's the number that you get when you type prayer into the Bible search engine, 253. So there may be some better verses out there than these, but these are a couple of my favorites. Clearly, we could spend the entire summer talking about prayer if we wanted to, and it may reappear again because there were several questions on this topic. And the questions themselves that we received about prayer represent the mystery that surrounds prayer and our quest to understand it. Because one person asked, how do we know if God is really listening? And another person asked, why do some people feel like God is not listening and God does not answer our prayers? Two very different thoughts about prayer. And I almost wish that I could have tracked you question askers down and sat you up here and moderated a discussion for everyone. And if anyone wants to do that this summer on another topic, I think that would be really fun. So think about that. But at the heart of it, I think that these two questions are actually very similar. So one person wants to know, how can we be sure? How can we be sure about something so mystical, something so intangible as prayer? And another person who seems to have no trouble believing in the power of prayer still seems to struggle and doesn't quite know how to talk confidently about prayer with family or friends who are seeking understanding. So this person who seems to be very confident in prayer and its importance still wants to know, still wants to be able to say to someone else how it is that we know for sure. How can I prove it to someone that prayer works? Well, to put it simply, as the Gospel of Luke tells us, we know that God listens because Jesus told us. Now, I know on the face of it, that's not a particularly satisfying answer. But I really love this little parable that Jesus uses to illustrate this to his disciples. It seems so realistic and so convincing to me. And I think that's partially because it takes us all the way back to Genesis 1. So first, Jesus instructs his disciples in teaching them the Lord's Prayer that they should pray to God as Father, that they should talk to God as they would talk to their own Father. We should pray to God just like we would talk to the person who gave us life, our mother and our father. And wouldn't we naturally expect our mother or our father to listen to us? Wouldn't we expect the author of life, the creator of everything, to be concerned with how things turn out? Last week, while I was on vacation, the theme of the worship service that I attended was on creation. And it was about reminding us of our core identity as children of God. From day one, or I guess really day 6, God created us because God wanted to be in relationship with human beings. This is one of the first things that we learn about God, that God wanted companionship, relationship, give and take. And of course, God got everything that comes with that. It quickly got messy, right, as we learn in the Old Testament. Things always do in relationships. But perhaps it's helpful to put ourselves in God's shoes for a minute, if God wears shoes. My point is that we ourselves here, each of us, are creators. Many of you have even created life. But whether it's art or literature, music, or a friendship, we all create things all the time. And we care about those things. We don't often turn our back on things that we've created. And if we do, we certainly don't do it lightly. And we are not perfect. But God is perfect. So if God created us for the sole purpose of being in relationship, then it stands to reason that, of course, God is listening. And of course, God will respond. Even if, like in Jesus' story, sometimes the response is simply because we just won't shut up. And if we as imperfect and deeply flawed creatures know how to give good gifts to our children and to our friends and to our neighbors and to our communities, how much more then does God know how to give good gifts to us? So Jesus tells his disciples to ask. Ask and you will receive. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened. Now, of course, as Jesus said, the response won't always be immediate. We may have to ask for a while. We may have to be persistent. But we can trust that if what we are asking for is in fact good, God will provide us with what we need. Now, I picked the Romans passage to go along with Luke's gospel this morning because, for starters, it also talks about perseverance in prayer as a central part of the Christian life. But what I like about this advice from Paul is that it also gives us something to do during those times in life when we don't feel like God is listening. So part of trusting God and trusting that God listens to our prayers is that while we wait for an answer in those uncomfortable times of waiting, we don't just sit around and twiddle our thumbs waiting for the answer to fall from the sky, although sometimes it may feel like that's what we're doing. But instead, when we reach out to God in prayer, we should be prepared to be active in our waiting, to do the things that Paul talks about in the letter to the Romans, to love others, to be genuine, to give of ourselves in service, to extend hospitality to strangers, to be patient when facing trials. And another simple way to say this, it's almost as if Paul is reminding us that sometimes you just have to fake it till you make it, right? Because the truth is that in doing all of these things, the things that Paul talks about, it's in doing those things that we often find the answers that we're seeking in prayer, right? Because more often than not, God places people and events in our lives that we later come to understand as the answer to our prayer. So we have to be ready. After all, Jesus says, knock, and the door will be open. He doesn't say, stand on the front porch quietly with your hands folded and ask for the door to be opened, right? No, indeed. We are to be bold in prayer, bold in our requests, and equally bold in our actions. And that's why regular prayer is so important. Because what we do each day in our lives and all of the things that happen to us as we live our lives, all of that changes our prayers, right? And it may not seem like it at first, but think about it. Sometimes we think we are asking for the same thing over and over again. But truly, God is working on our hearts and working on our minds, and day after day, even if the theme is the same, the request might be a little different. We begin to see and understand the situation just a little bit differently. We may begin by asking for the quick fix. We want that thing that we think will make everything else in our lives fall right into place, right? But God knows and God understands all of these things even better than we do, what we really need. And God may have a very different path in mind for us to get there. But the goals are the same in terms of God wanting to give us the things that we need. And day after day, through prayer and action, God's wisdom and God's goodness is revealed. Thanks be to God. So it's a mysterious thing, prayer. But everything that I've shared with you this morning, I know to be true. And I know because I trust in the words of Jesus in Holy Scripture. But I know also because throughout my life as a Christian, other Christians, including many of you, have shared with me the times in their lives that they've experienced the power of prayer. And of course, I myself have experienced these mysterious things. The mysterious presence of God actively working in my life. And I wish that I had had time to collect some of these stories to share with you today. Like we could watch a video and you could hear different people share their stories about prayer. So maybe that's a project we can work on together at some point. But my concluding advice to you today is this. Keep at it. Persevere in prayer. And just as importantly, when you find your answer, share it with someone else. Share it with someone else. Even if you don't feel like you have the right words or it won't make sense to anyone except for you, Take that leap of faith and share the miracle of an answered prayer with someone. Because you never know, that may just be the answer that God is giving to someone else's prayer. Amen.